Hey everyone. I wanted to do a game analysis today of a classical game that I played on lichess this morning. There's a theme in this game of sacrifices and also counter-sacrifices. It was a very exciting game, so I'm very much looking forward to going through this with you. So I've been trying out the King's Indian defense as black in the last few days. And so we have this standard position in the King's Indian. And then my opponent plays the move f3, which takes us into the Saemisch variation. White is establishing a very strong center here and usually gets a space advantage. However, one downside of the move f3 is that it blocks the most natural development square for this knight here. So sometimes the development of these kingside pieces can be a little bit awkward for white. I castled. My opponent played bishop e3, and I played the move c6, which is a flexible move. I've had this played against me before when I was playing white pieces. And it's just potentially threatening to expand on the queen side, potentially just controlling a modest share of the center. I think in future I'm planning to play the more enterprising c5. And this pawn sacrifice is quite sound, actually. So white can trade the queens and then win a pawn, but black gets very active pieces here. These knights are really good. And you can see that the development issues for white are quite awkward. So c6, probably not something I'll play much again. My opponent develops knight ge2, queen c7. Now, this move is it's not coming up in the Masters database, so it's probably not very good. Although I don't know exactly why. I mean, it's a somewhat useful move. It develops, it controls the e5 square. But yeah, black's position is definitely a little bit passive at this particular moment. So probably, yeah, okay, so moves like e5 make a bit more sense. This is more active. And the queen maybe is more flexible on d8 than it is on c7. Maybe it can come over to the king side as well in some instances. Also, a6 does make quite a lot of sense for supporting this potential queenside expansion that black could consider to try to alleviate the space problem. But okay, I played queen c7, probably not very accurate. Queen d2, I play e5, normal King's Indian move. And now my opponent lashes out with the move g4. And I could see that my opponent was planning to launch an attack on the king side in this position. And because of my lack of central control in space, it doesn't seem that easy to meet this kingside attack. Also, with this battery of queen and bishop here, white is threatening to trade off my dark square bishop, which is a very important defender of my king. So this kind of setup is somewhat reminiscent of a Sicilian dragon. And so I feel I don't really want to allow the exchange of the dark square bishops here. So I play the move rook e8. This means in the event of bishop h6, my bishop can drop back to h8, and I'm not losing a rook on f8. Moreover, I am now potentially threatening some kind of tactics on the e-file in future if white is not careful. So this rook e8 does seem like a useful developing move while keeping this bishop on g7 intact. My opponent plays h4, okay, really going hard on this plan of the kingside attack. So I played h5 here, I mean, maybe you don't have to play h5, but it seemed very unpleasant to allow white to play the move h5 and to open up this h-file, especially when my queenside pieces are, very much lacking in development. So I thought h5 is probably the best practical try. I am weakening quite severely the control of the g5 square. But I figured that's not a huge deal in this situation, since I do have moves like knight h7, potentially to try and control that square. Also, I was thinking about where this knight could go, and I was interested in the idea of bringing knights like this to potentially to e6, if I'm allowed to, where it would be offering some control of g5 square as well. Note, by the way, going back to rook e8, maybe one other option was to play in the center by playing e takes d4, but I felt this would simply help white to bring a piece to a more active position, and it also kind of reveals this pressure on the d file, on this weak pawn on d6, so white is probably threatening to castle queenside anyway, and so I think opening up the center in this position would have been a strategic mistake. Okay, so rook e8, h4, h5. My opponent takes, and of course he's opened the g file, trying to attack my king. I play knight takes h5. This knight is just trying to block the king side, essentially. And for the moment, you can see that I'm also controlling the g3 square, so white cannot, at this moment, bring this knight to g3, although I did realize that white would be able to do that very soon, and then it might get a little bit awkward for me once white trades off this blockading knight. Okay, so white played bishop h6. He wants to trade off all of the defenders of my king if he can. I go back with bishop h8. I think it is very crucial to keep this defender. And another thing is you can see that there is some pressure on white's d4 pawn here. So if this knight does come to g3 at some point, I may be able to capture here, win a pawn, and win a bit of time and space in the center, which in principle is the correct way to relieve the pressure of a kingside attack. However, my opponent plays rook g1, and yeah, they're getting into quite a strong position for some attack. So I figure I have to develop, I have to start developing. I want this knight to come over to the king side, get another defender over there. My opponent plays queen g5, and you see the tactical idea behind this move. So this g6 pawn is now pinned, so white is actually threatening queen takes h5. Okay, so I fortunately don't blunder that, so I bring this other knight over to f6 to protect h5. And now white plays knight g3. It's got protection on that now. So quite an important decision here. I decided to exchange that knight, and there was a specific reason for that, which is the other move that comes to mind here. It's king h8, king h7. Pardon me, just unpinning that g6 pawn. So in the event white trades on h5, I will be able to recapture with the pawn at some stage. So just to illustrate, if black does a nothing move here, then white is going to win material, like so. So here's the thing. If I play king h7, I thought white might have this idea of knight f5. And this just seemed quite unpleasant to face because basically there's too much pressure on this g6 pawn. And the king side is going to be opening up. So let's say I take, and white gets this attack on g6, and the g file is going to become open. I'm not entirely sure whether this position is lost for black or anything. I can take with check here. White blocks. And yeah, I wasn't too sure about this position during the game, but it seemed quite awkward to deal with this kind of threat. So maybe I have to play something like rook g8 to have enough defenders on g6. But this position looks a bit dubious for black, in my opinion. So okay, instead of playing king h7 in this position and allowing knight f5, I decided why not trade and get rid of one of white's attackers. So after king h7, it's now not so clear how white should continue the attack. Because if he plays h5 here, now I can just take. And you can see the value of having the king off of the g-file here. So my opponent just played a developing move, bishop e2. It kind of guards the e-file, which could be useful given the presence of this rook. And another purpose of this move, I believe, is that the bishop is going to add some support to the h5 square. And I think if white can get in the move pawn h5, they might start peeling the king open. However, I now have time to take this pawn, and of course this knight is hanging. So I thought I was gaining a bit of time here. I thought also, importantly, the knight does not have a good square to go to. So if the knight went to any of these squares, I think I would have been happy. The second idea of this move, e takes d4, was I want to play the move rook to e5 and just chase this queen away. And that would help my king sleep better at night. So my opponent played a very good and very shocking move here. That is the move f4. Again, just preventing the defensive idea, first of all. The defensive idea of rook e5. Sacking the knight on c3, but the idea is that white may well be crashing through with the pawn pushing to f5 here. So I chose not to take on c3 in the game. If I take on c3 in this position, let's see, can whites play h5, for example? This is what I was most concerned about, because as you can see, g6 is under threat, and the presence of the bishop on e2 is kind of making things a bit more difficult. And the thing is, okay, I can take this pawn with check, but now it seems really difficult to defend my king, because these squares are very weak. g6 is very weak as well. Although it does occur to me that I will have this move bishop f5. Yeah, just coming to rescue in time. So maybe this was okay. Maybe it was okay to play d takes c3 immediately. f5 could also be attempted after this move. So then if I take with the pawn, black is material up, but white's attack seems to be alive and well, and this didn't seem like a good idea to go for this during the game. Note how yeah, this g8 square is a bit loose, so the rook is a bit tied down. But maybe black survives this. It's an interesting variation. In any case, after white played this move f4, sacrificing the knight on c3, I figured perhaps I should try and disrupt this kind of worrying pawn duo here. So I considered the move knight takes e4, but I thought this maybe will be a bit unpleasant for black after Because one thing is this kind of gives him an easy escape with the knight. So let's say takes. So yes, the move that I was worried about here was h5. And again, there's this bishop f5 defensive idea, similar to what happened in the game, really. So I think black is probably just about surviving in this situation, even if it does look a bit tenuous. There are some ideas like bishop d3 now, trying to remove the bishop on f5, and I just thought this looked a little bit scary. So I actually chose the move rook takes e4, with the idea that if they play knight takes e4 now, I can play knight takes e4 and I'm winning the material back anyway because of this fork. I'm also immediately just pinning the bishop here. And getting ready to play bishop f5 at the same time while keeping the knight stationed at a more defensive post for now. So this seemed to kind of maximize the chances of maintaining my king safety. White continues the attack with h5, but now this defensive idea of bishop f5 does seem pretty darn strong. Notice how in this position, if white does not take my rook on e4, my other rook is going to start coming into the game, and this e-file control will actually be very, very strong. And it's just not so clear how white can continue the attack at this point. My opponent tried h takes g6, and I recapture like this, f takes g6, castle's queenside. And I started to realize that now that white's rook is coming into the game, the threats against my king are actually far from over. So this was becoming rather scary to play. I decided to take the knight on c3 because I didn't see how white was immediately checkmating me. So I thought it was better to take the material at this point and not to allow knight takes e4. Because also now I figured white's bishop on e2 is hanging. So surely I should have enough material to kind of survive. White goes rook h1, and this is the thing. So this sets up quite a scary threat of bishop f8 check. But I thought this should be survivable. Let's say I play rook takes e2, for instance, bishop f8 check. Now, my idea was actually to play king g8 here. Interestingly, if you try to block in this position, there's a very nice, I believe, forced mate with rook takes h5, takes, and white takes here, and it's checkmate. So it just goes to show you've got to be extremely careful in this position. So what I planned was king g8, and now it's not so clear how white can checkmate the black king. I mean, yes, white can take this, but I don't actually see in this position how white can break through. The trouble is that the trouble for white is, I mean, you do have these attacks on the G file, but it actually seems to be sufficiently covered in this situation. So I thought this was probably okay. Thought there was a way to survive here, even if I had gone for what seemed to be the most obvious move, rook takes e2. However, then I noticed that I might as well throw in this check, because it comes without loss of time, first of all. And also, okay, first of all, if white moves away with the king, then there is the idea of just queening this pawn, dragging the rook away from h1. And I feel this should be winning for black. Like this, for example. And I just don't think white has any way to break through here. So it's not so obvious what to do about this check. If you take, then I get to take on e2 with check. And this looks pretty terrible for white. So my opponent played king b1. And I thought I was immediately winning the game with rook takes e2 because it's coming with check, right? And in fact, in this position, white only has one legal move. And I don't know if my opponent had calculated this in advance, but he has to play the move queen takes f5, which is the only way of getting out of check. The trouble is, I've kind of helped my opponent find this queen sack by making it his only legal move. I'm pretty sure if I take, it's an immediate checkmate with bishop f8. And I can block, but it's mate in the end. So the rooks on these H and G files are just setting up this mating net. So now I having seen this, I think, oh god, I've blundered. Surely white's now going to win. And how do I stop this checkmate threat that still very much exists, even if I don't take the queen? So after doing a bit of panicking, I realized that what I need to do here is I need to distract this rook away from the h1 square, or just away from the h file, because the presence of the rooks on the h and g files is what is making my king super unsafe. So I mean, just to illustrate, if black does a nothing move here, there are similar ideas, bishop f8 check, and you go back, and this sort of thing doesn't look too healthy. Although maybe black is not immediately getting mated, I'm not sure. Yes, it's a pretty chaotic position. I will need to analyze this further in my own time. So the idea I came up with, in any case, to try and get this rook away from h1 was to play rook e1 check, counter-sacrificing material, allowing white to take this rook. But the idea is now I can take the queen, and bishop f8 is not checkmate in this position. I mean, in fact, it's not even check. So although okay, something maybe went wrong in my calculation here. Okay, so here's the thing. I remember now. So if I play queen f7 now, then I'm able to block the threat of mate with this construction, and the bishop on f8 is hanging. So this should be winning for black. So that is why I now have time to take the queen on f5, because this rook is not immediately present to give mate. So rook h1, and it's very, very close to a forced mate with this bishop f8 idea. But with that extra tempo that I gained from sacrificing my rook on e1, my queen now comes back and it's in position to set up that defensive construction with the knight blocking on h5. Now, this looks pretty scary anyway, because white is double attacking the h5 square with this move. So I realized it around this stage. I was either going to get checkmated or I would be losing my queen. I don't think there's any alternative. So I have to block the h file. White takes, and if I do something random, then I'm getting mated. Or am I? Either getting mated or having to sack the queen. So it's similar to what happened in the game. So I decided, though, that it was okay to counter-sacrifice the queen in this way, because now we're getting into an endgame where not only am I 3 pawns up, I also have this huge pawn on b2, which is supported by my dark square bishop. So from this point onwards, the win was pretty straightforward. I actually didn't particularly want to go into a rook endgame, because in this position, if you take, you lose the pawn on b2, and I mean, it should be winning, of course, for black, but rook endings are not always the easiest to win. So in this position, after bishop g5, I play rook h8, and this allows trades, but under more favorable circumstances. In particular circumstances where I'm getting to keep this pawn or win the exchange. So if black plays bishop takes f6, I will take, and this simply doesn't work, actually. And if black takes on h8, then I'm keeping the pawn on b2. So white avoids exchanges with rook g1, and now I bring my rook into an active position, just clinging onto the b2 pawn as well. This check doesn't do anything. Rook e2 just going onto an open active file. Rook h1, white is trying to get this counterplay, but it just doesn't really cut it. So I come here attacking the bishop. If white tries this check, I'm going to go king g6 and 2 pieces are hanging. So white can't do this. So he goes back, trying to avoid simplification with bishop e1. And now I just played king e6, and white's position is extremely passive now. If the rook ever moves away from the back rank, then I'm going to have rook g1 just picking up that bishop on e1. So from here, it was quite elementary. My opponent tried to get a stalemate by sacrificing all of the pawns, but fortunately, I was wise enough to avoid this, and the game ended like so. All right, well, I hope you found that to be an interesting game, everyone. I think it shows how, when you're on the defensive, you have to consider these counter-sacrifice ideas. In this game, my opponent sacrificed a lot of pieces, and I think if I had played in a materialistic way, then I would have lost this game. But the fact was that I realized I had to calculate extremely carefully to keep my king safe. And so I was not thinking too much about the material and only about how to avoid getting checkmated, which in this case, thankfully, was enough to get the win. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Take care for now and see you later. Thanks. Bye.